They are actively working to keep it in the federal arena, to keep the ranchers in their contracts with the BLM so that they can remain ignorant of their rights.
LaVoy said, when you sign that emancipation, that's the crossing the Rubicon.
Welcome back to the second hour of the Thursday segment of the Liberty Lineup Radio Show. This is the naked truth, where we think right and wrong, not right and left. With Ben McClintock and Enoch Moore of DefendingUtah.org. Today we have the smoking gun of what was the cause of the ambush up in Oregon. We've got nationally known constitutional speaker KrisAnne Hall, all on the second hour of the Liberty Lineup. We'd like to thank our show sponsor, Patriot Mobile, the only cell phone service that gives you the peace of mind that your monthly bills are supporting only conservative candidates and causes of your choice, including this show. Call 877-367-7524. Be among the first 10 callers during this show today, and you'll get a special offer. Just mention the Liberty Lineup Radio Show. Call now, 877-367-7524. That is 877-367-7524. For more information, go to patriotmobile.com. Make sure and remember, mention the Liberty Lineup Radio Show. We'd also like to remind you that you can listen to the Liberty Lineup online by downloading the K-Talk Radio app to your smartphone or the k-talk.com. Great reception wherever you are. Become part of our grassroots movement by signing up at libertylineup.com, where you can also make a donation to support the cause of liberty. Help us spread liberty around the world. You can also check out the Defending Utah segment of the show at iHeartRadio, as well as subscribe to the Defending Utah YouTube channel. Hope you'll do that, and that'll be a great thing to be able to make sure you're kept up to date on all the things that we're talking about and have those automatically sent to your phone when those get updated.
I signed up, Ben.
Me too.
All right.
So we've got we actually have a lot of people signing up for our YouTube at DefendingUtah.org and checking those things out. Defending Utah has a Facebook page. You can get Defending Utah pretty much anywhere. And you know what? We mentioned earlier in the show about how the politicians are, both Democrats and Republicans vote together 80 to 90% of the time. And so that's why Defending Utah and this segment of the shows, really our motto is think right and wrong, not right and left. Because when we get stuck on personalities, we get stuck on parties, we allow them to get away with things that we would never let people that we think oppose us get away with those things. Like, so if Obama does something, you're going to go after him. But if the Republican did that same thing, if you're thinking about personalities as opposed to principles, you're going to let the Republican get away with it. And so we need to keep liberty alive, we've got to apply the same principles to everybody. So that's why we say that we think right and wrong, not right and left. But before we went to the break, we really started introducing what we're getting into now, the smoking gun, what really happened with why did the government go after the protesters up in Oregon? What was the real problem?
And so we have a witness. He spoke. He's sort of a witness to this. He spoke at this meeting to the ranchers
in January, about a week before the death of LaVoy.
And he told them some things, and this is what made them say, "Yep, they're doing the right thing." And 8 ranchers signed their declaration, the same thing that LaVoy did, and that the guy from New Mexico drove up to meet them in Oregon, that he did. And we're going to tell you what it was that made them willing to do that, and why that's so dangerous to the BLM and the establishment. So this is Angus McIntosh, just telling a little bit about his background briefly. We'll just introduce that here. He worked for the Forest Service, as we said, and after he left the Forest Service, he became I believe he got a PhD in a degree related to these land management issues. He wrote his dissertation on the Hague case, which is a famous rancher case that was even before the Bundy stuff got into the media.
This is a real credible guy. This isn't some nut job just going around saying whatever he wants to. This guy's got peer review. He knows his stuff.
So here's our first clip from him speaking.
And what really got me interested in these issues is the fact that I was working for the Forest Service. I never considered myself as being, negative towards ranchers at all. I always thought that I was. My family's involved in ranching. We had a ranch in Arizona. Half of it was in the BLM grazing district, and so I was friendly towards the ranchers, and I felt.
Okay, so Dr. McIntosh, but he was a rancher. He came from a ranching background, and he worked for the Forest Service, and he considered himself friendly to the ranchers. He said, we're just he saw his duty as, we lease rights to the ranchers. That's because the government owns these rights, but he saw himself as friendly to the ranchers, and he was a nice guy to the ranchers. So one day he decides to talk to his boss, and he came up with this idea. And I mentioned before the break that he realized there were things the BLM did that really made life hard for the ranchers. And he's like, it would be a lot easier. And he came up with this idea that would make things easier for them. And he tried to present it to his boss. And this was the first moment where something really came out.
A light goes off.
A light goes off, and so grab your popcorn. And so this is about a 2-minute clip as he explains his experience of going into his boss.
Angus McIntosh.
Did Dr. Angus McIntosh, before he was a PhD, when he was still working for the Forest Service.
I had this idea. I thought, why don't we just make ranchers put up a bond like they do with miners, and that way if something gets messed up, we'll just fix it and don't have to drag people in court, make your life a living hell, and all that. And I thought, man, that's a good idea. So I go to my boss and I said, hey, I got this idea. Why don't we try this? And he said, well, we can't really do that. And I said, well, why not? He said, because they own their lawns. And I thought for a second. I said, wait a minute. I've been told my whole life, ranchers don't own anything. They're only here because we allow them to be here. So I'm thinking this, and I said, well, wait a minute. What do you mean they own their allotments? Is there a law? How did they own their allotments? He said, well, under this series of laws that was passed in the 1800s, late 1800s, early 1900s, they own their allotments. And I said, well, like what law? And he said, well, like the stock raising homestead law. Well, I never even heard of that law. And most people, I'm sure, probably have never heard of it. But it got me thinking. I said, wait a minute. If there's federal laws that recognize these property rights and these ranchers actually own something, then how can we make them do anything at all? And that was my next question. I said, well, wait a minute. I said, if they own their allotments, how can we make them do anything? And he looks at me and he kind of gets this twinkle in his eye and he says, you get them to sign something. Then you got them. That's exactly how he put it. I was in disbelief. This was shocking me. But
it's like, that reminds me of I've got this image in my mind of this diabolical cartoon character with this handlebar mustache where he's twisting his mustache. Then you got him.
You get him to sign something.
I mean, so let this sink in for our listeners. So this first-hand witness, guy working for the Forest Service, says, he's got this idea to help the ranchers out, to make things easier. Let's do this bond process. And his boss comes back and says, no, we can't do that. They own their land.
They own their allotments.
And so it just totally debunks the government line and the media line that these guys are welfare ranchers. That they try to put out there that these guys are just mooches and that they're not wanting to pay their fair share, that they're just it just totally debunks that idea. It totally throws it in the garbage where it belongs. These guys are not welfare ranchers. They own their allotments. And the only way they can get the feds get away with this is by tricking them under false pretenses to sign something.
To sign something. Then you got them. Let's hear that diabolical pinky in the brain again, really quick.
I said, well, wait a minute. I said, if they own their allotments, how can we make them do anything? And he looks at me and he kind of gets this twinkle in his eye and he says, you get them to sign something. Then you got them.
Then you got them.
Then you got them. One more time.
And he looks at me and he kind of gets this twinkle in his eye and he says, you get them to sign something. Then you got them.
So the ranchers originally have the rights to their lands. They have the right to their allotment. But then under false pretenses, the BLM comes in and the Forest Service comes in and gets them to sign something giving up their pre-existing rights.
Now, listen to the next one. This next one's going to floor you just the same. Let's see. We've got 3 minutes to break, so we're going to play this full clip. You're going to have to just listen to it and digest it, and then we're going to go to the break right after the clip, and then we'll talk more after the break about this. So here's Dr. Angus McIntosh. One day he's in a meeting. He's in an allotment planning meeting with his boss, and they're talking about well, you all listen to yourself.
I was in a meeting. If there's ranchers in here that have been in an allotment planning meeting with the Forest Service or BLM, I was sitting in this meeting and the Game and Fish Department was there, and my boss, the district ranger, he asked the game department guy, he says, well, what does the Department of Wildlife want to see on it? He says, well, we don't want any cows. We just want elk. So my boss, he says, okay, that sounds like a good alternative. We'll put that as one of our potential alternatives in our planning process.
So I'll pause there real quick. The one of the bureaucrats in front of the guy who owns this land and has rights, as they're talking about what are we going to do with this guy's land, he's like, well, we don't want him to have any cows. Basically just saying he shouldn't have any rights. And they're just casual, like, okay, that's an option. And then he moves forward. And so that's what has happened so far.
And the rancher, his jaw just dropped. He didn't know what to say. And he was just sitting there just completely shocked that this was a possibility. But think about this. If these are public lands, by very definition, there are no rights. And so this government planning process is where the public participates with the federal agencies on deciding whether or not you're going to be. But I turned to my boss and I said, wait a minute. I said, I happen to know for a fact this guy owns water rights on this creek that runs through his whole allotment. And he owns enough water rights that he could drive that creek if he wanted to. He's got stock water rights. He's got irrigation water rights. He even had a water right for a little hydro plant that made electricity for his house.
Okay, pausing there before we finish the other smoking gun part of this clip. We'll just leave that as a cliffhanger over for the break. But he's in this allotment planning meeting, and they're just casually talking about how this guy just doesn't get any rights, and he's going to lose all his land. And Dr. McIntosh at the time, it was like, well, wait a minute. I happen to know all these rights he has, and he's bringing up the honest truth about the law. And we'll tell you what happens after the break.
All those things that he has on his land. This is Ben McClintock with my co-host,
Enoch Moore
of DefendingUtah.org, and this is the Naked Truth segment of the Liberty Lineup Radio Show on AM 630, K-Talk.com. We've been talking about the smoking gun. Angus McIntosh speaking about what are the rights they really have and how do they get the ranchers to give up their rights. They are not welfare ranchers. They are being lied to, and they're being tricked into giving up their land rights. More right after the break. This is Ben McClintock with my co-host,
Enoch Moore
from DefendingUtah.org. And we are back on K-Talk Radio, AM 630, K-Talk.com with the Liberty Lineup Thursday show, The Naked Truth, where we think right and wrong not right and left. And, of course, our segment sponsor is medicalcostshare.com. Join our grassroots network and get our updates and alerts at libertylineup.com. That's libertylineup.com. You can support the cause of liberty with a donation of any amount. That's libertylineup.com. You can also like and share our Facebook page, The Liberty Lineup Radio Show. And we've been talking about Dr. Angus McIntosh, who gave a presentation earlier in the year down in Cedar City, right before the death of LaVoy Finicum, and what was going on there, and about how the ranchers have rights that they don't even know about, and that they're being tricked into signing these agreements to take away these ranchers' property rights.
So we played the audio clip, first of all, where his boss, when he worked for the Forest Service, told him that, where he said, you get him to sign something, then you got him.
He looks at me and he kind of gets this twinkle in his eye, and he says, you get him to sign something, then you got him.
And then we started playing the next clip of a meeting he was at, an allotment planning meeting, where they were discussing basically the future of this rancher's life, and they're casually talking about how they're going to destroy it as if it were just business as usual. And so we're about to get to the bombshell in that clip. So I'm just going to continue on with that clip here.
Deciding whether or not you're going to be there. But I turned to my boss and I said, wait a minute. I said, I happen to know for a fact this guy owns water rights on this creek that runs through his whole allotment. And he owns enough water rights that he could drive that creek if he wanted to. He's got stock water rights. He's got irrigation water rights. He even had a water right for a little hydro plant that made electricity for his house. And so I said, if you kick him off, we're going to have to compensate him for his property. And, that's going to make it a very expensive proposition. My boss says, well, okay, we'll just scratch that off. We won't have that as an alternative. And we went on with the meeting, coming up with all these different alternatives. After the meeting, my boss comes up to me, and he sticks his finger right in my face, and he says, listen, that guy is so ignorant, he doesn't know what his rights are. You keep your mouth shut. That is not our job. And I think that's the day when I decided I'm not going to work for the Forest Service anymore. Because it turns you into a locker. Now, I know there's probably people in here that have good friends, work for the Forest Service and BLM, but I have to tell you, 99% of them are ignorant, just as ignorant as anybody else, and I'm not saying you're ignorant people, don't get me wrong. When you don't know something that is helpful to you, then you are ignorant of that. Okay? And there is a huge gap in our society. People do not know the laws.
Ignorant doesn't mean stupid, I think, is one of the major points.
Ignorant just means they don't know. They don't know what they don't know.
Right. We're all ignorant on something, and those farmers are, and the workers at the BLM are. But he was in a case where he had to leave the BLM because if he had stayed, it would have made him a liar. Because it's their job. If they aren't ignorant,
well, he said it's not your job to tell him his rights.
No, that's what I mean.
Yeah.
So if you're in the BLM and you know about the rancher's rights, it's your job to keep the farmer or the rancher ignorant of his rights, and to perpetuate the idea that if the rancher leaves his contract with the BLM, was created under false pretenses, that rancher is a welfare rancher because he's actually getting his rights back. And so, according to the government line, if you're not giving up your rights willingly, then you're a welfare recipient.
Let's hear that one part one more time.
After the meeting, my boss comes up to me, and he sticks his finger right in my face, and he says, listen, that guy is so ignorant, he doesn't know what his rights are. You keep your mouth shut. That is not our job.
Wow, just let your heart sink there.
You got to let that sink in.
Let it
realize what's being said there, because this leads into what was going on. What was the purpose of that meeting?
They keep this information. He wasn't allowed to educate the rancher on his rights, and they know that the rancher has all the rights unless they get them to sign something.
Exactly. And so that they need to have us ignorant. They need to have you ignorant. Because if you're ignorant, then you will allow these things to continue. And this is a message that the ranchers need to have. Because this is exactly what Angus McIntosh and the others there in Cedar City were trying to get the ranchers in Utah to understand. If they understood this, then they would take the appropriate action to be able to be free again, to restore their rights back to their land that they had, that the BLM leaders, that the BLM officials knew that they had, and had dedicated towards making the ranchers ignorant of. Because if you are not ignorant, you can be free. The truth shall set you free. And so that's why it's so important. That's why this was a virus, actually. Because at this meeting here in January in Cedar City, the ranchers were working to get, Angus McIntosh, which was just speaking, and others were trying to get the ranchers to understand this, and so that they could declare their independence from the BLM, because they were the contract that they were on was under false pretenses. And there are a network of elected officials in the state that have a dedicated interest to maintaining that ignorance. And right before the death of LaVoy, he was on our show. And he spoke to us about the things that were going on, because that's what he was doing. He was going around educating the ranchers on their rights, and then explaining to them that they could declare the independence from the BLM. And he was going around telling the ranchers what they could do, and exactly what the ranchers were doing there in Cedar City to declare independence from the BLM. And so let's play that clip from LaVoy.
Okay, I'm going to play that clip, but I'm going to play. If you're just joining us, I want to emphasize what we just played here. In the words of the Forest Service themselves, this is how they got the ranchers to give up their rights, right? When they get them to sign something.
And he looks at me and he kind of gets this twinkle in his eye and he says, you get them to sign something, then you got them.
Right, so LaVoy and others understanding this, when they start actually reversing that process to restore their rights by withdrawing their consent, this is what the legislature in Utah did to stop this process.
Let's sign this emancipation. He says, let's do it now, and they were about ready to do it. And Mike Noel and this group found out about this, and they ran up there the next week. Said, no, don't do that. That could have been the first full county in the whole union to throw off these federal chains.
So what they're doing is trying to get people not to be involved.
Well, let me go specifics. Let's go to specifics. Paiute County and Wayne County, they contacted me and said, come and talk to us. And so I came and talked, and he said, bring the people that says that they'll stand beside you and support you physically. So I brought them too. Or they actually invited them on their own. And so we were all there in that meeting. At the end of the meeting, they said, we need to do this. Let's sign this emancipation of all these contracts. See, that's the crossing of the Rubicon, and that's where you cross the river. It's when you sever those officially, those contractual agreements. And he said, let's do it now, and they were about ready to do it. And Mike Noel and this group found out about this, and they ran up there the next week. Said, no, give us more time. We will get this done. Don't do that. Don't do that. And so it took the steam out of it. And so that could have been the first full county, because they have the sheriffs behind them. That could have been the first full county in the whole union to throw off these federal chains. But it was the politicians that stopped it. And the very ones are saying, we're fighting for your liberty. We're fighting for the Constitution.
Those wolves in sheep's clothing that say that they're fighting for your liberties are the ones that are stopping them, because in keeping the ranchers in their contracts. Let's go and play that leather clip that LaVoy talked about, what this organization is.
The federal government loves the American Land Council. What do? They keep it in the legislative arena. They keep it in the judicial arena. And what arena? The federal judicial arena.
So that's what he's talking about. They keep the American Lands Council, Mike Noel and Ken Ivory, they are actively working to keep it in the federal arena, to keep the ranchers in their contracts with the BLM so that they can remain ignorant of their rights.
LaVoy said, when you sign that emancipation, that's the crossing the Rubicon. So that was what was creating their freedom. That was their Declaration of Independence.
Exactly.
And just as we heard the Forest Service manager say to Dr. McIntosh, you get him to sign something, then you got him.
Exactly.
And that's what it all came down to, folks.
Which brings us to our special guest. We have KrisAnne Hall. KrisAnne Hall is an attorney and former prosecutor who travels the country teaching the Constitution and the history that gave us our founding documents. You can find her at KrisAnneHall.com, KrisAnneHall.com. Thank you, KrisAnne. Thanks for being on the show.
Oh, it is my pleasure. Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm excited about my visit to Utah.
Yes, tell us about that. You are coming to Utah. When and where?
Well, I will be in Utah the week of June 20th. I will be in Ogden, Utah, teaching a class on religious liberty at the Royal Library. I will be also in Ogden on the 21st teaching the history of the Constitution to students at the Smith and Edwards Theater. I will then be in Salt Lake City teaching the constitutional role and duty of our state and local representatives at your legislators. This is actually the second time that I have been in your state legislators teaching this constitutional role and duty of the state legislator. I was brought in a couple of years ago by Representative Curtis Oda to teach this class. And now Oda is bringing me back to teach it again. And the first time that I taught it, the people were so excited about your representatives. Your Attorney General was there. He had members of his staff there. I had the Conservative Caucus from the House and the Senate there. And there were many, many people very, very excited about learning the factual matters of the sovereignty of the state, the powers reserved and possessed by the states, and the superiority of the states over the federal government. And that's what we're going to be doing again. We're going to be teaching the duty, as James Madison said, of the state to interpose, not legally, as many may argue, but actually to interpose by defying the federal government when they are exercising power that's not been delegated.
Right. Yep. Nullification.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. I really hope that sinks into our legislators and because that's what they need to be doing. We've been involved actually in trying to get some nullification bills worked through in years past. It was some organizations we're involved in, and hasn't always been too successful. And so we're really excited that you will be there to help our legislators understand these things.
And if our listeners go to KrisAnneHall.com and click on your calendar of events, they can find out all the details there as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd make a specific plea to your listeners. Contact your senators and your House members right now and start emailing them every single day and make sure that they attend this class.
Okay.
Not only that, email the governor, email the attorney general. The governor did not come last time. I think that the governor should accompany the attorney general this time to the
Absolutely.
class. And I think that these are the essential things. And here's the people need to understand that if we really believe this, if we really want a peaceful resolution to the federal government stealing our land, this is it. This is it's not even me teaching this class. It's me facilitating the plan that our framers had in mind when they created the Constitutional Republic, because the whole class is built of nothing but simply the words and the directives of the framers on what we, the people, were supposed to be doing when the federal government escaped its limited and defined box.
When is the right time to stand up for freedom? Could it be when you start to feel creating children who'll inherit the pain and the debt of this nation and be slaves to the banks that cause hyperinflation, who are masters of commerce, lies, and bad legislation?